I'm so excited for this episode, this debrief. I want to let you catch your breath a little bit because I want to jump right into this thing with Stephanie Lepp. I thought it was an incredible conversation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moments in the journey of this podcast, 10,000 Heroes, where we refer, and sometimes when you actually examine directly this idea of integral philosophy. And it comes back kind of cyclically, I noticed, in certain themes that you explore. There are certain conversations that I think are not talking about it as much as they are demonstrating it. And of course, you guys do refer to it in your conversation, but Stephanie is doing such a wonderful job of modeling it in her work and in her bearing to society. And actually what I want to say, and actually maybe this will let us take a pause to catch our breath. Ankur and I just had a dance break just before we started recording this.
Yeah, it was intense.
I wish we'd recorded it. It would have been good to have. But what I would like to say, invite our listener to stop listening to us and go explore Stephanie's work from the show notes so that you have context. So if you didn't give yourself the opportunity to do that after listening to the actual conversation, stop everything you're doing and do it now. Because it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good what she's doing.
And I just made the show notes this morning. And so they're all in there. The Reckonings Project, the Deep Reckonings, the Venn diagram thing, the long Twitter thread on Venn diagrams. It's all just, it's so good.
Yeah. So the Reckonings and the Deep Reckonings are the two sort of aspects of the work. The Reckonings, that's her podcast. These are conversations. These are actual people having the reckonings publicly.
Yeah.
And the Deep Reckonings, for context, welcome back, by the way, after you've gone and consumed that content. Thank you for doing that. And now you know this, but I'll just say it anyway. So the Deep Reckoning here is Stephanie's utilization of the deep fake technology, where she's reimagining some of these figures having this public moment of reckoning with truth. And then your conversation kind of shoots out in a bunch of different directions, always tracing this invitation to leave the space. Actually, I think a really good lead-in is your very lead-in in the conversation itself, where you bring up this idea of Trump, maybe, and this really resonated what you said about Trump, because I not necessarily about Trump. I haven't had that fantasy myself, but I have it all over the place. Not that mishap will befall people necessarily, but that they'll be confronted with some version of reality. And then they'll have this character arc. They'll have this turning. And that's what Stephanie's done, is kind of reimagine this. But then she says something interesting to you in that moment. Whereas if he had that, would there be the space in society to permit that? So this to me was really actually, and I think it coincides with the assignment, and you guys made it very easy for me to take something away and try. But this assignment of kind of writing this letter, right? And she says to imagine the reckoning, imagine what this person might teach society when they come back. And so this was really food for thought for me, because I see really how little room I leave a lot of people in my life to have that reckoning.
Could you remind me and our listeners about the assignment?
Yeah, sure. So it's to identify someone, and for you in the conversation, it's Dick Cheney, right?
It's always Dick Cheney.
It's always Dick Cheney, which really dates you and maybe me. But you also say, and Stephanie lets you off the hook, right? Because there's some people that it's just too far outside your capacity to integrate, and that's okay. So you pick someone that is within the realm. So it could be a public figure, it could be a personal relationship. And Stephanie offers these 3 prompts. She expands on what you propose as kind of writing this letter to this person. But Stephanie offers for you to consider, what is this person reckoning with, first of all? So like, what is that dynamic of truth or the event, or what is this? So, maybe Dick Cheney has to reckon with the death toll of the wars he wrought. Who knows? Then you think, what do I think happened? And she has an important caveat on this. It's giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it's steel manning their position.
Yeah.
Give them the benefit of the doubt. And what do I think was either going through their mind, or what circumstances, here's how I interpreted her prompt, what circumstances might have made them feel like they had no other option in this case? What led them to this? And then here's what I think is the genius part of her invitation is, if they had this reckoning, what would they then have to teach us? And to me, that particularly brings it full circle, because it's really not to give them, just to give them the benefit of the doubt, not to just put ourselves in their shoes, but then to honor the journey of their reckoning and actually the value of it in its wisdom.
Yeah, God, there's just so much. It's just so much I love about everything. About her work, about what you just said, and the thing that's really crystallizing for me right now is the inclusivity.
Yeah,
like these people, whether they're in our families or on the public stage, they're just people that do something we don't like. We're like, you're bad, and this is a way of like, it really disconnects that. And this is, Gandhi would always say this. He's like, criticize the action, not the person. And so it's really drawing that line of like, all right, you did this thing that I'm not down with. How can we use the fact that that is reality and that happened to improve everybody's consciousness? Like, what could you do, or what could I imagine you doing that would not only be healing for you, but would be healing for me? And I would get to learn from it because you're doing something so difficult, so courageous that I haven't reckoned with something like that. It's just, God, it's just so, it's like radical inclusivity. Like, take person you criticize most and kind of bring them into the fold of like, here, teach me what it's like to overcome that.
Fourth altar.
You want to say a little more about that?
We talked about it in a previous episode. I'm just referring to Alonso Del Rio's system of the four altars. And, these are almost stations that you might bring to a meditation. But just to refer to the fourth altar, where the invitation there is to include someone that you've left aside this whole time, right? Because they just are so far removed from your conversation. They're so othered in your mind that this is actually the point of unity for you, is where you sort of bifurcated or kind of split from some other part of yourself. You've kind of exiled that. So that's just an aside. But without going too far in the metaphysics there, I think this is such a central theme in so much what we were just discussing earlier today with our coaching work. And to me, it's really interesting, maybe counterintuitively, the ideas of expediency and efficiency can really serve us in this if we really pay attention to what we want, if we really think about the outcomes we're looking for. So often, I think we get caught up in these tribal dynamics or this fight just for the sake of the fight. But if we brought our awareness back to what we were actually after, which in the case of kind of the social divisiveness or this sort of tribalism that we're experiencing, for most people, it's outcomes. They want a different society, right? And if you really want a different society, then you would be driven to explore more effective or more efficient ways to communicate and get those outcomes from your perceived opponents.
If I want a more harmonious and inclusive society, my strategy of just like hating the people that disagree with me may not be the best strategy.
Right. Maybe. I mean, what do you think about that as a way to kind of orient ourselves to this? Is like, well, let's just think about like what's the actual efficient means.
Oh yeah. No, it's certainly true. And it's one of the themes for me in the podcast. Like I was thinking the other day, like, what are the things I love talking about? I love talking about anything that's related to like mystic wisdom. Like Sufi poetry. We have a few episodes about that.
We love that. Yeah.
Anything that has to do with like people having positive experiences with psychedelics and really changing their lives. Yeah. Love that. I'm a sucker for that. And then this thing of mediation and overcoming opposites. We had Ken Cloak, that really awesome mediator. We had this guy, Kern Bear, who goes on a road trip of the country and talks to people he disagrees with, try and figure out what's going on. I think this is really in that vein of like, all right, face our own, like every intolerance or viperishness or hatred I have is an invitation to grow. And like Stephanie she just has that down so well. Like I think you said earlier, it's like it's in her cells, right? She's just living that like, okay, how is this an invitation for me to grow? How is this an invitation for our whole society to get over something instead of just being against something?
Yeah, and I want to highlight something that Stephanie mentioned, like part of her experience. This isn't the easy path. This isn't a cop-out. Like she said, she lives in constant artistic agony and holding herself to this type of inquiry, this type of integration or integral pursuit. So it's not the easy route. And I think that's important because what I feel like might be an obstacle for someone that's listening to this in maybe putting down some of that fight and being open to these other pathways of communication is that you feel like you're abandoning the fight, right? And there's not just the tribal dynamics that are opposing the other side, but there's also very powerful tribal dynamics that are keeping you in the sense of belonging with this tribe and this alignment and this purpose that you feel with a group of people. And it can feel very like you're losing something or you're giving up by abandoning the fight. And I think she actually mentions this too. It's interesting is that, or you tell this story of the Nazi standing war trial for war crimes.
Oh, Eichmann.
The Hannah Arendt's
Adolf Eichmann.
Yeah. And what backlash there is to that, because actually kind of this sort of conviction and vitriol, it's also a way of virtue signaling, right? And finding your place amongst the tribe. Yeah,
and I think it's motivating. It's hard to believe in something. There's like a lot of other things to do just to maintain life.
Yeah.
And so in order to stay motivated, I think this tribalism is really useful.
Sure.
I think there's lots of great parts of tribalism. Like it keeps your sense of identity, belonging, meaning, motivation. But she's getting to this larger question, which is maybe to try and put it in a pithy way, is us versus them working for me? Yeah. Like that's the question.
Is us versus them working for me? Yeah.
So it's not like we have to abandon what we believe in,
right.
or even stop advocating for it. But just like she did at that meeting in the Redwoods, it's like, can I still have the ends that I'm trying to achieve without making this into an us versus them dynamic? And what I hear you saying is, it's actually more likely.
Yeah, right. Well, I hear you saying that too.
Yeah,
I hear us both saying that. But I'm also saying, I think it's just not so easy. It's not so simple. It takes a moment, at least takes some pause or examination, because, and I don't want to do just a rundown of the hot takes from the news, but this is everywhere right now. It feels like a minefield. Like if I'm not, if you're not saying something, if you're not standing up to the brutality, to that evil in the world, you're part of the problem. You're complicit. And I think what we're both saying is that this isn't necessarily being complicit. You're not just accepting the wrong, but you're really asking what's the most efficient, most expedient way to correct this wrong or to achieve a change. And Stephanie actually refers to it as her theory of change, I think, in the conversation.
Yeah, it's like there's another item on the menu. So the items on the menu we know about are silence, being complicit, and antagonism, or I don't know, what's another word for that? Just maybe we've just identified it with being vocal, like speaking up means speaking out against something. And we can add this item to the menu that you can act and speak in favor of something that doesn't just play into this pre-existing us versus them thing. That's actually not the most efficient way of getting where you want to go.
Well, you use the example in the conversation of the Brett Kavanaugh deep reckoning and propose what it could have been instead. instead of what Stephanie did, which had this nuanced, integral human component to it, of him actually coming to this realization and revelation in this thing. It could have just been, I'm Brett Kavanaugh, I'm a horrible person, I'm a rapist.
Yeah.
Right. And that might be one kind of way to troll the other side. Right. But then you can imagine the response would then just be the other side finding the counterpart deepfake, and it just turns into a rap battle with your proxy celebrities or power figures, right?
Right, which is it's good that you're bringing the deep fake thing again, because there's a couple parts of that about that I think are really important. So one is that I had only thought of like pretty negative uses of deep fakes.
Yeah.
And so this is like, wow, this is a totally acknowledged deep fake. There's no games being played with people here, but it is meant to, like, it's a theater experience where you have this feeling of like, God, what would that be like? And the goal of it is to give the subject of the deep fake, Brett Kavanaugh in this case, that experience of what it might be like, which might be hard for that person to imagine, and then actually encourage it to happen. So that was like, blew my mind on all these levels. And I think the reason she was able to do that so well in such a nuanced fashion, in a way that I probably wouldn't, or you wouldn't, if we were just to imagine somebody apologizing and self-criticizing himself, it would be like way more just, oh yeah, I'm a rapist and I'm a horrible person, I should spend my life in jail. It's because she like did this whole project of actual reckonings, and she heard dozens of them and realized that that's not how they go. And in my mind, it's like, I can imagine the human ego and the human mind, we just have a really hard time supporting a total 180 degree flip and just rejection of everything that I did before. I think it'd just be like hard for this edifice to be able to handle. And it's never that simple. They're never just like all evil people like their opponents think they are. So she's like been through that so many times and heard the actual, like, what is it like for a guy who like was a date rapist in college to transform and turn around and apologize for it? Like, how does that actually sound? She's in the details of it. It's not just theory for her, right? She like knows what it sounds like.
There's something you said I think I hadn't drawn that connection, and it's that she came to that technology. She didn't know about deepfake. She admits that. She came to this thing, saw this tool, and wow, but she had all this research under her already. She had all this anecdotal evidence that she'd collected by interviewing these people. And I hadn't drawn that connection before you just said that, but it's true. Like it was really necessary for her to hear what one of those sounded like in real life, which so few people have that in their history. Few people have done that type of research or have any desire to.
Yeah. The other we can listen to 25 that she's done. This is so amazing.
Well, that's right. And we can all benefit from her work, which thank God. Something I want to say right now that's occurring to me that might be the theme of this conversation, at least, is coming back to this idea of nonviolence. And it's really that nonviolence doesn't equal pacifism. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's something Gandhi, who's another one of my themes I could just talk about forever.
Yeah.
And we have a few times.
Right.
He would say that all the time.
Nonviolence is not pacifism.
Nonviolence is not pacifism, and nonviolence is not non-action.
And not non-action. And we talk a lot about nonviolent communication, at least between us, I know. And I know it's a big theme in your work. I don't know if we've mentioned it at all on this podcast. Can you give us just help us define nonviolent communication? Just maybe we have a brand new listener on the show.
Yeah. Let's see. I want to define it the way I think about it, not the way it's officially defined.
Right. So that's what I'm asking.
It's a communication strategy, or it's a way of approaching communication. I mean, just actually, I'm glad you bring it in. It's because it's very similar to this. Rather than setting up an antagonistic thing, like, okay, let's it's best to do it with an example. So if I'm feeling anger, like, Nate, you didn't make your bed this morning. There's like many ways I could approach that. Like if I was a parent or a friend or even whatever, it's like, why didn't you do X? Nonviolent communication, which would immediately lead to defensiveness, which happens in like almost all of our interactions. But the nonviolent communication thing is almost like, all right, how could I say this that is going to minimize the likelihood of defensiveness and still get my point across? And I think what the guy, Marshall Rosenberg, who I refer to as Uncle Marshall, and I think what Uncle Marshall came to is if I can just be vulnerable about what I was looking for and how I didn't get it, I'm going to trust that the person I'm interacting with has my interests in mind and is interested in me getting my needs met. And then that person will then volunteer within the scope of their abilities and what works for them and their whole time management and moral system and everything, things they could do that'll help me meet my needs. And so that's a strategic interpretation. And another interpretation is like a personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. So rather than placing the cause of my emotions at your feet, I like fully own the fact that my emotions are related to things that I care about and I want, and that you didn't play the part I wanted you to play in satisfaction of my emotions. But it really liberates us both to figure out, I can figure out different ways I can satisfy my needs, and you can figure out different ways of satisfying my needs if you want to, that don't involve doing the thing that I originally asked you to do.
Right.
So I think it really expands the playing field from what might be like a zero-sum game of like, can you do this thing for me, to many more dimensions of like, what can I take off your plate so that it's no longer a contentious thing of who does the thing.
Right. And again, just to draw the parallels here, I think that nonviolent communication isn't asking people to surrender or abandon their boundaries. Doesn't mean you have to be less assertive.
Or not say anything.
Or not say anything. It's actually, in my experience, it's the opposite. Because I think a lot of us are kind of trapped in these violent fantasies of our mind where we like say all like the very like digging one-liners, and then we like stand up to the dude in the restaurant, we kick his ass, and then we're like totally the hero in our own drama. But in reality, we say nothing and we just suffer.
And we just stew.
And stew, and then maybe hop online and troll somebody from the other side there where we're safe kind of behind our keyboard. But this is a different, you said radical inclusivity. It's also sort of a radical transparency. And I want to offer it to the listener as a life hack. It's not that you're giving up what you want or the goal on any level, societal, cultural, personal, or anywhere else. It's actually, this is an offering just to experiment with, just to try out, give it a shot. You might like it, of how to get what you want more expediently.
Yeah. Yeah. And can I connect it to something else
I hope you will.
It's almost, I mean, to me, it's really about being present to the moment, because we'll go through life with these desires. Like, I want this to happen. Oh, I wanted that to happen. And if we can stay present to like, this is the situation, this is the reality right now, then it's much more, it's like, all right, something just shifted. This is the reality right now. How do I get what I want? I think of like some kind of skateboarder or mountain biker, like some ski racer guy going really fast. Right. And once that person makes one mistake or some obstacle like tree comes up in a place they didn't want, if they're good and if they want to survive, they're not spending time wishing that tree wasn't there or dissing the tree. They're just like, how do I move and include this tree in what I'm doing right now so I get to keep going fast without killing myself?
Right.
And I think it's like that level of paying attention at every moment, staying out of, like you said, staying out of the fantasy. Yeah. And being like, all right, how do I use the situation to the advantage of my growth?
Yeah, and in this case, the situation that you're talking about is just reality.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just how can I be on the same side as reality?
Yeah.
I think that's an important question we can all ask ourselves. And I think the real sleeper thing here, the subtle aspect of this, is that there's a certain amount of fantasy just tied in with all of our ideologies. Because sort of implicit in that is how things ought to be or should have been.
Oh, yeah.
And this really forces us to deal with what is, how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
How this person is right in front of us now. They are this. And we might not want them to be like that, or we might not want them to exist at all, but they do.
Oh, yeah.
And so like I think this might be a way for someone to interact with this simply at first, is just to think of this as sort of a life hack. Right? Like you can actually be self-interested and going after this and exploring this, because that's the beauty of win-win. and sidestepping or escaping or evading this zero sum trap, this dilemma that we all find ourselves in. So many of us find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Maybe not Gandhi.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some of the time. It's just like it's a percentage question, right? Most of us spend most of our time trapped. Gandhi hopefully spent less of his time trapped there.
If there's only one cup of chai, then it is a zero sum game.
Yeah.
Maybe. Because you can split it in two.
Yeah, or find another camel to milk.
Okay. So I'm going to take on this assignment. I'm not going to reveal who I choose, because that's personal. But I'm gonna explore that, and I invite the listener to do the same. And I'll just say the prompts again. So the idea is to pick someone, and you think first, what is this person reckoning with? What's the truth there? And I invite you to go visit some of the deep reckonings on Stephanie's website. You can find those in the show notes below. And you can use some of these reckonings as an example of when you think of what is this person reckoning with, but what's really the crux of this situation, your beef with this person. And then just think, what do I think happened? Steel manning or giving them the benefit of the doubt, the absolute benefit of the doubt, as Stephanie says. So what circumstances or inner motivations or demands might have led this person to feel like they had no other choice in this situation. And then finally, I think what Ankur and I are in consensus, what really ties the room together here is to ask yourself, if they had this reckoning, what would they have to teach us? So what is the value of this reckoning for the greater good, for society as a whole? And for also, I'll add to this, what is the value for you as an individual? And you can take these prompts onto a piece of paper. You can write it as a letter or just a journal entry, I think would suffice. And that's the takeaway. That's the assignment. That's the experiment from this wonderful conversation with Stephanie Lepp. Ankur, thank you for doing the good work, finding these people, bringing them to us so we can digest their delicious tidbits of offerings into the world. I really, 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 maybe I'll reach out to Stephanie and just tell her how much I appreciate her.
Oh yeah. It's so awesome. This was one of my favorite interviews to do. I'm so glad we got to do it and we got to talk about it.
And thank you all for listening. Please follow us, respond to us, comment, get in touch with us in any of the ways that work for you, which you can find right below this episode.